Hi, this is a quick video to show that I wanted to show that I'm made my first gluten-free bread. So yeah, this is my first attempt at gluten-free bread. And there you can see what it looks like. Still steaming a bit. And it tastes pretty good. So I'm going to quickly talk about this gluten-free bread that I just made. I'll tell you the flour. I used something called berry flour, corn flour, and chickpea flour. I think that's it. Those are the three types of flour. I used instant yeast. I used a Fleischmann's gluten-free bread recipe. That was the recipe I used, roughly. I used 3 organic free-range eggs. I used a cup of warm water. I think I can't remember if I put milk in this. I don't think I put milk in it. I put oil in it. Put virgin olive oil in it. I put lots of honey. I put like 3 teaspoons of like unpasteurized honey. And I used a little bit of ground what do you call those things? I gotta get my bag of ingredients. So I used a little bit of ground chia. That's what it is, chia. I used ground chia flour, like ground chia, and I also used some psyllium husk. So they call for like xanthan gum, and xanthan gum is what to use in gluten-free bread. If you use yeast, I used yeast, so I used the instant yeast. And then what makes the instant yeast work better in gluten-free bread is if you have like, there's no gluten in the bread, obviously, so what you use is xanthan gum. And if you don't have xanthan gum, I found out that a substitute for xanthan gum is chia seeds, like, but you've got to like sort of like grind them up. So ground up chia, and also psyllium husk. So I actually used both. It says one or the other, but I used both. And so yeah, I did this as a yeast bread, so I used yeast. So, and here's the trick. I'm really good. I'm getting better at making cakes and breads. One of the tricks is that I use a blender. Like not many people use a blender. And I did a really unique trick too. Is that what I did was, so I put the, everything has to be room temperature, but that's not a big deal. So I put the eggs, like whole eggs, in the blender, like 3 whole eggs. And then I put the oil, and then I put the honey. And oh, I gotta get the recipe out now. Oh, here it is. So yeah, oh, I used apple cider vinegar, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, because that's better for the yeast. So I used honey, warm water, and I think I used a little bit of almond milk instead of milk powder. I might not even put that in. I think I actually might have forgotten it. But so anyways, I put the eggs, the vinegar, they say melted butter, but instead I used like a 1/4 cup of virgin olive oil. Honey, I used more honey than they called for, so I used like 3 teaspoons of, like I said, unpasteurized honey, which is supposedly really good for you, and warm water. And I didn't use salt. It called for salt, and I didn't use salt because they say salt is not good for the yeast. The wheat yeast goes better without the salt. So I took the salt out. No salt in this one. I didn't use salt, and I didn't use xanthan gum. This is the Fleischmann's yeast recipe for gluten-free egg bread. And instead of having xanthan gum, I told you I used those seeds, whatever. I used a little bit of psyllium husk. I had psyllium husk. I actually had psyllium husk, which is pretty wild. And I had chia. Like I had chia, ground chia. I actually had ground chia. So it's pretty awesome because I was like trying to find xanthan gum today in the store, and I couldn't find it. And then I sort of said, well, what can I substitute for xanthan gum? And I used chia and psyllium husk or psyllium husk. So, anyways, and here's how I did it, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I put all the wet ingredients in the blender, which I love using the blender. Why do I like using the blender? Because it aerates everything. You want as much air when you're baking like cakes and bread. You want as much air in the egg mixture as possible because it makes your bread less sort of like a lump of dough. Okay, so you want to, I use a blender because it's super easy. So you just put all the wet ingredients in the blender and then blend it. You don't even have to blend it really hard. I just blended it like, I mixed on like medium and high for like just like a minute, under a minute, and until it all looked good. And then here's another thing that I did that probably not a lot of people would do, is that I started spooning. Like I put all the dry ingredients in another bowl and then I smushed them together just to get all the lumps out of them. And then I put those dry ingredients into the blender, like I did like 3 teaspoons or 6 teaspoons at a time, and then blended it. So I could gradually put the dough into the blender. Like I'm talking about a blender here. So, but you got to be careful because you don't want the blender like jamming up, right? So it just so happens that I put the dry ingredients in the blender, blended it, and then I almost added all of the ingredients into the blender. And make sure you use the pulse mode because it's just much easier to control with the pulse mode on your blender. So yeah, so I just put all the dry ingredients in the blender, blended it, and that was making the dough, right? And then when it was almost like when I put almost all the dry ingredients, was getting quite thick in the blender, so I just poured it all back into the bowl, and then I mixed that mixture together with a little bit of the leftover dry ingredients, and then that made a really wet dough. Like the dough was pretty wet. It wasn't your typical dough, and I didn't do any kneading. I didn't knead the dough at all. Like it was just wet and it was mostly blended, and then I just stirred the rest of the dry ingredients in with that blended mixture. And then I poured that into a pan with the parchment paper. So I put the parchment paper and poured it in there, and it filled like I had to use a bigger pan, and then I filled it like about half full. And then I turned the oven on high, is a gas oven, and I let it heat up pretty good. And then I switched the oven off. I turned the gas off, and I opened the oven and I put it in the oven for like 15 minutes, kind of a really warm oven, just to rise it. And it rised, and it was almost like pouring over the edges of the pan. And then basically I just turned the oven onto like, the temperature, which it says here 375, and then I just put it in and I timed it for like 40 minutes, because it says 35 to 45 minutes, so I just put a timer on for 40 minutes. And then I could smell that it was starting to like, get done. So then I just went in and I put a little something in there just to make sure that there was not sticky inside, just to test. And then I turned the oven off, and it's nice bread, man. I'm pretty happy. This is my first ever gluten-free experiment of bread. And as you can see, I used a bigger pan. So yeah, it looks nice. I go gluten-free, and I'll tell you something about being gluten-free. Your whole body chemistry changes after you go strict gluten-free. Like I'm talking strict gluten-free, like nothing, like no bread whatsoever, or no gluten. So if you go strict gluten-free, you're gonna notice your body sort of really change. Maybe I noticed mine really changed, and but I just have less brain fog. Like I just feel more alert, and I just have more energy. It's a different kind of energy. Those of you who've gone gluten free know what kind of energy it is. It's like I would say you don't have like energy mood swings. Like it's more of a constant energy than an energy mood swing, like where you have like high energy, low energy. It's just you feel like you have constant energy, like, but it's not like overwhelming. So it's just it's just a different way to be. I've been gluten free for a long time, but then sort of like I sort of slacked off and I stopped being gluten free. And I've had this goal, the goal to make gluten free bread. I mean, I'm talking about I've had this goal for like a year to make gluten free bread, and so it's finally happening. And I started off like baking a couple of gluten free cakes, which I had the cake mixes for, just sitting in my cupboard. So I made the gluten free cakes, and the first one wasn't good. The second one was a lot better. Like I said, I used a blender, and so I hope this helps somebody trying to try a gluten free bread. And I'll just tell you that the flavor is it's awesome. It's it tastes like a really really nice whole wheat loaf, and it's got the sweetness because it's got like that unpasteurized honey, which gives it a nice sweetness to it. And like I said, I used Beru flour. There's Beru flour, corn flour, chickpea flour, and I think that's it. Beru, corn, and chickpea flour in here. So those are the three different flours that I used, um, and it turned out great. So, anyways, with the psyllium husk and with the ground chia seeds, and 3 eggs, 3 organic free range eggs, and virgin olive oil, and hot water, and it turned it out amazing. So thumbs up and good luck with your gluten free bread. Thanks for watching.